Hi there, welcome back to the Community of Readers video blog. We're following the Old Testament readings for the Monkey Bar Challenge, and this week we're looking at the book of Habakkuk. This is called An Absent Author. Habakkuk is one of the shortest and the most obscure books in the Old Testament. It's no one really knows anything about who Habakkuk actually was. He's probably writing around the time that Babylon captures Nineveh in Assyria, so possibly 612, but no one really knows. And even if we know the date, we don't know anything about the man Habakkuk, assuming he was a man. Now this is quite different from some of the other prophets, particularly where we just spent some time looking at Jeremiah, of whom we know the most. What do we do when we actually don't know anything about the person who's writing prophecy? I mean, it doesn't matter so much, does it, when they're writing history? Because you can kind of take the history at face value. But when it's prophecy and it's a bit more obscure and it's picture language, and you've got no way of placing the person from whom these prophecies came, it can be quite hard to make sense of them. This is one of those issues that raises itself through all of our Bible reading. What's the relationship between us, the reader, the text, and the context behind it? It's almost like there's a window, and we peer through this window to see this ancient world. And depending on the text we're reading, that window can be bigger or smaller. And with Habakkuk, it's pretty small and pretty opaque. So what do we do with that? Well, during the 19th century, so a fair old while ago, there were two kind of responses that emerged to this. So one was the liberal response, which was basically, it came at a time where the main thing that mattered was science. And could you verify something scientifically? And so historical texts, and particularly religious texts, were understood to be subject to huge bias. And so you can't really trust what's being said in them. So we kind of discount that and we look for other extra biblical sources, particularly archaeology, to give us what we need. Now there are loads and loads of good things that came out of that time, a huge amount of understanding about ancient history. But the problem was the text itself that we were looking at, the Bible itself, really got sidelined and it lost its power. Now the other response, which was kind of a reaction, was a much more conservative response, and in the kind of early evangelical movement, that basically said the text is what really matters, and it appealed to Christian tradition. And some of the other more conservative movements still were appealing to Christian tradition and said, no, the text is what matters. Let's not get carried away with all this other stuff. But it actually became more than that. It became quite fundamentalist and a kind of total naive literalism, that we've just got to take this text, this is all that matters, we can't have anything else, we can't have any other authority from any other sources. And of course the reason that literalism is so naive is that there is no such thing as a text without a context. In fact, con means with, and text, so text with text. There is no such thing as a text without other text within which it interacts and flows and has conversation. I myself, in a sense, am a text. The text of my life interacts and engages with this text that I read. And all of us come with glasses through which we see whatever we read because of all the experiences that we've had, the things that we believe, all sorts of reasons. But literalism doesn't acknowledge any of that. It just says this is what is. And so these are these two different reactions, real problems in their own way. Now, some of those still exist, and there's a strong fundamentalist evangelical tradition going on that I think is dangerous. But we have managed to find some ways through this. We realise that actually all writing is biased. So let's not be too hard on history or even religious history. Let's take these texts that we've got in the Bible as they are, but that doesn't mean we can't question them. And we're willing to hold that text front and centre, but still listen to those other voices. But when we when we sit round the table, as it were, the table of the text itself that we're looking at, whether it's Habakkuk or any other text in the Bible, we then have a variety of different voices. And for me, this is where it becomes really interesting, because I really passionately believe in the value of the scriptures. And the scriptures, for me, what I understand by that is that this is the authoritative account of this faith community's story so far. This is the authoritative account of this community's faith story so far. But that doesn't mean that all those things agree with each other or hold together well, or even are necessarily all historically accurate by the best archaeological or historical evidence that we can find. And that's not the only reason we question them. I've talked about Joshua, for example. There's loads of archaeological evidence to question the story that the book of Joshua tells, but I think there are loads of ethical questions that the rest of the Bible raises about the book of Joshua. And that's part of the wonderful dialogue of being involved with the scriptures. But the question that is raised by Habakkuk is, does it matter when you don't know who an author was or what they were trying to do? Because in Habakkuk's case, perhaps more than with any other biblical text, we don't know. We just don't know. What do you do with that? Should we just say, because actually for many of us when we read the Bible, we get something from it. We feel like God is speaking to us. And we've no idea really whether that bears any relevance to what the original author was trying to do. Does that matter? Well, I think that it does. I think we should still strive, with all the limitations that really are there, we should strive to find that voice, that original voice. And not let that be the only way that we can read, but to make sure that we keep that search alive. Let's take an example from Habakkuk. So, Habakkuk chapter 2, for example. So it's chapter 2, verse 13. Habakkuk's talking about the rise of the Babylonian army, and he's using the language of the Lord Almighty, is how it's normally translated. Now, the Lord Almighty is a translation from the Hebrew Yahweh Sabaoth, which sometimes gets translated Lord of the Hosts or Lord of the Armies. So it makes a bit more sense why he's using it in this context. The Lord of the Armies is against this marauding would-be army of the Babylonians. But if we push this a bit further and we understand a bit more about the historical context, then we get a lot more from it. So Yahweh Sabaoth literally means the one who rides on the cherubim. And the cherubim in ancient Near East culture are not these kind of weird baby things with shooting arrows, like Cupid or whatever. Cherubim are these fearsome, enormous, fearsome creatures like lions with huge wings. And they would sit in palaces with these great wings touching. And that would be the symbol of the throne of the king. And in the temple in Jerusalem, there was one such throne. You get the description of it in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verses 10 to 13. It's awesome. I mean, these monstrously large lion-type figures with these huge wings that touched in the middle. And that is the throne of Yahweh. So when Habakkuk says that Yahweh Sabaoth is challenging the Babylonians, it means so much more than when we just read the Lord Almighty. Because it's not just this big mighty God is challenging your army, but it comes right from the deepest, most profound idea within the whole of Jewish faith, that in the temple, heaven meets earth. And when Habakkuk challenges the idols of Babylon, there's a religious challenge that this is the God of the whole world who is here and is on the side of the people of Israel. Now, if you don't know the history, you can't get to that deeper understanding of what's going on in the text. Now, it causes us some problems when we think about our contemporary world, because if we're going to talk about the rule of Yahweh in our world, we can't talk about the temple, And we're not going to talk about cherubim because they don't form part of our worldview. And we don't want to talk about Yahweh as the Lord of armies in a way that as if God intervenes in human wars and takes sides. There are so many problems with saying that. So we don't just want to kind of pull something out of Habakkuk's world and plonk it in our own. But we want the investigation, we want the search, we want the story. I want to reach, however falteringly and fumblingly, I want to reach through into Habakkuk's world, and I want to grasp that storyline that runs right from Eden and weaves its way, on which I find the God of this story, and follow him as that storyline weaves its way into our world. This, for me, is why understanding the Bible in a deep way, in a historical way, and searching for the author still really matters. It's not the only thing that matters, but for me it still really matters. And part of the reason is the Bible is not a toy. The Bible's not a toy. It is powerful. And while it occupies this position that it does within our Christian communities as scriptures, it has power to shape ideas, to shape our imagination, our beliefs, our lives. And we have to take it seriously. One of the things that I think is a great irony of our time is that so many of these liberal churches have faded away, and many of the growing churches now in the UK at least are evangelical churches. And for those of us in evangelical churches, the Bible is held in really high esteem. I mean, we take it really seriously, and yet we don't know it very well. We don't really know what we're doing with it very well. I think it's a real problem that if you take the average university level educated Christian adult in the UK, I don't think many of them would be able to pass a degree, pass a GCSE, sorry, not a degree, pass a GCSE in biblical studies. Now, I don't think that we need to get people to some kind of degree level, but we need to up our game. Because if we're going to take understanding these texts, this story, this collection of writings that we love and that we base our community around, this is the table around which we gather. We have to know what we're doing. But we also have to take a challenge from the history of how biblical scholarship has gone, where it has been at times something that's been removed from the world, hasn't been connected, hasn't connected with people's lives. So we need to learn to read better, but not just to read the Bible better, but also to read our world better.